Both of them, first time ever.
Really?
Same day.
Oh my, Illinois has it the same day. Oh, yeah.
The Subcommittee on Information Technology and the Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order. And without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. And I think we're good on votes later in the afternoon, right? So that's a plus for once. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. You know, nearly 2 years ago to today, we released the first Fitara scorecard, or what some refer to as ISA Conley. Is that right, Mr. Conley? This bipartisan committee product, produced with GAO assistance, has been intended to drive technology reform across all of our federal agencies. Today, the committee released the fourth Fitara scorecard, and the committee, in coordination with GAO, has adjusted the calculation and added new metrics for each version of the scorecard since the beginning. For example, Fitara Scorecard 3.0, the final grade included a plus to indicate that the CIO reports to the secretary or deputy secretary of the agency, and a minus to indicate that the CIO does not report to one of these officials. That system remains in place for Scorecard 4.0, and I strongly urge that all agencies with a minus to adjust their reporting structure. This is an easy fix that will help agencies continue to move towards 21st century IT practices. For Scorecard 4.0, the committee made two adjustments to the grading. First, we simplified the calculation for the incremental developmental area to capture more incremental projects. Second, we incorporated OMB data center optimization metrics into the data center grade so that half the grade is now based on savings as a result of consolidation, and half the grade is based upon meeting optimization metrics. OMB published these optimization metrics last year, so they should not be a surprise to agencies, and we did this based on feedback from the agencies. The committee is also previewing a new grading area related to the Fitara and Megabyte Act requirements on software license management inventories and effectiveness of software licenses. There's absolutely no excuse for agencies not to have an accurate inventory of the software licenses they have. This is basic IT management. From Scorecard 3.0 to Scorecard 4.0, agency grades, 4 agency grades have improved, 15 agencies' grades have stayed the same, and 5 agencies have declined. Notably, the Department of Defense grade declined from a D to an F. The committee reduced DoD's grade due to a lack of transparency on IT spending. DoD appears to have reclassified a significant percentage of its IT spending as national security systems, which are not covered by Fitara. This lack of transparency is unacceptable. My colleagues and I will be following up with the DoD on this issue. We also have our first ever A on the scorecard. USAID, after receiving Ds on each of the first 3 scorecards, significantly improved its scores, particularly in the areas of incremental developmental transparency and risk management. I applaud the work of the Office of the USAID CIO to address the score and encourage other agencies to look to them as an example in these areas. Today's hearing features witnesses from HHS, which has received Ds on all 4 versions of the scorecard and currently has 44 open GAO recommendations related to high-risk IT acquisitions and operations. I look forward to hearing HHS's plan to close out those recommendations and turn those grades around. Before I close, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Chairman Chaffetz. The prioritization of IT and cybersecurity issues on the Oversight Committee has been an integral aspect of this committee's success, and I am thankful for Chairman Chaffetz's leadership on these issues. The Congress and the country are better off because of his service as chairman of the Oversight Committee. I thank Chairman Chaffetz for his service and leadership, and I look forward to working with Chairman Gatti as he leads the committee forward. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today. And now, it is my pleasure to recognize my friend and the ranking member of the Subcommittee on IT for her opening statement. Ms. Kelly, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Conley, for your leadership and the leadership you've shown our subcommittee's continuing work continuing to work together to oversee federal information technology systems. Key to this oversight has been the scorecard our subcommittees have developed for grading agency progress and fulfilling the requirements of the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, or Fitara, or ISA Conley. The latest Fitara scorecard shows that President Trump's hiring freeze and plan for imposing deep workforce reductions to agencies may have already begun to reverse the gains many agencies have been making under the prior administration. In January, President Trump ordered a freeze on the hiring of federal civilian employees, preventing agencies from fulfilling vacancies or creating new positions. This past April, the Office of Management and Budget issued a new directive mandating that the agencies reduce their civilian workforce. Under the OMB directive, agencies are now required to, and I quote, begin taking immediate actions to achieve near-term workforce reduction. The President's plan for reducing the federal workforce will make it even more difficult for agencies to hire the most skilled, tech-savvy workforce needed to fully implement Fitara. This past March, our subcommittees held a hearing on the challenges the federal government is facing in federal IT acquisition and heard from some of the leading IT experts in the private sector. Many of these experts agreed that one of the most critical challenges to modernizing government IT operations is the need to hire more IT professionals. As the new scorecard shows, several agencies have hit roadblocks, and some, like the Department of Health and Human Services, which is here today, continue to fall behind in meeting the requirements of Fitara. Forcing these agencies to make across-the-board cuts to their workforces on top of the hiring freeze could make it more difficult for them to fulfill the requirements. It wasn't always this way. Prior scorecards showed steady progress among agencies, but for the first time since our committee began measuring compliance, the new scorecard shows that overall agency progress has stalled under this administration. More specifically, the new scorecard indicates that the grades of only 4 agencies improved. 15 agencies had no improvement whatsoever, and the grades for 5 agencies actually went down. In contrast, when the subcommittees released their scorecard this past December, 3 times as many agencies showed improvement in their scores, and only 1 agency had a decrease in their grades. The new scorecard highlights the fact that the Trump administration's federal workforce policies are harmful and counterproductive. As I pointed out at the hearing our subcommittee held this past December on Fitara, I hope there will be bipartisan interest in holding the Trump administration to the same high standards to which we held the last administration. I want to thank the witnesses for testifying and thank the chair again.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now I'd like to recognize the chairman of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say thank you for your leadership on this critical area. You've forgotten more about IT than I ever knew, and I appreciate your leadership. And certainly for the ISA Conley law, or as the gentleman from Virginia would love to call it, the Conley-ISA law. Thank you both for your leadership, and as we look at moving forward, I want to thank all of you for being here. Some of this may be not so pleasant. At the same time, it is becoming critically important that we address these issues, and as you will see, in a bipartisan fashion, we are taking this extremely serious. And it will have implications from a standpoint of appropriations and other areas that if our IT CIOs don't take it as seriously, they will see other areas that potentially could be impacted because of their inaction. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The chairman yields back. Now it's a pleasure to recognize the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mr. Conley, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me thank you and my friend, Mr. Meadows, and my dear friend, Robin Kelly from Illinois, for the bipartisan leadership of these 2 subcommittees. I think one of the big differences between this period and of course, my co-author, Mr. Issa, is here with us today as well. We've handled this on a bipartisan basis. There is no daylight between us or among us on this issue, and I think sending that message to the executive branch is critical. What was lacking under Klinger-Cohen was any continuity or any robust follow-up because Mr. Klinger retired, Mr. Cohen became Secretary of Defense. That's not the case here. We're still here, and we mean it. And we are going to continue to press for progress on the implementation of Fitara, also known as Isaac Conley. We're also, I hope, going to introduce legislation shortly to extend the sunset provisions, which I think is one of the recommendations of the GAO, and Mr. Powner may elaborate on that today. But we don't want to lose progress by having those provisions expire prematurely. And we need more time for implementation. Not forever, but we need more time. I echo all of the sentiments my colleagues have shared in their opening statements. And I want to first begin by citing what the chairman cited, which is the progress at AID. Here's an agency that began at a fairly low score and decided, you know what, we can't settle for that. What did they do? They reached out to GAO, and they said, what can we do to improve our performance? And you know what? They listened to advice, and they implemented it. And they now have the highest score and the greatest progress of any federal agency, AID. So when some agencies say, well, it's too complicated, et cetera, AID has proved that's not true. If there's the political will, if there's a managerial desire to self-improve and to come into the 21st century, you'll have congressional support, you'll have GAO support, and you'll have a nice grade. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum is a recalcitrant, arrogant management style at the Department of Defense. Don't bother us with these troublesome requirements or standards. We are exempt from everything. We will police ourselves, and we'll set our own goals and objectives and metrics. The fact that they, of course, fall short of everybody else's is immaterial. And what's so disturbing about that is they're the big budget. And I know when we met with GAO, we were very disappointed in DOD's performance. And all of us agreed, again, on a bipartisan basis, to insist that they improve their performance, that they come into compliance like every other federal agency. And the burden is on them even greater because they have the dollars. They have the biggest budget of anybody, and they're about to get bigger. And so it's incumbent upon the Department of Defense to get right with the Lord. And we're going to help them along on a bipartisan basis. I believe the scorecard is a terribly important tool for measuring progress. And I thank GAO for working with us in coming up with it. I repeat what I've always said. It's not designed to be a scarlet letter on anyone's back. It's designed to prod senior management to provide the wherewithal for a CIO in a reporting sequence, but also empowerment. So there's accountability, there's transparency, there's responsibility. And it's the taxpayer who benefits. So we've set metrics that against which we believe people can be fairly measured. And we think it's working. Not as fast as we'd like. And the slow pace of naming a permanent CIO with the transition and new administration has cost us some progress. And that's why we want to extend the sunset provisions. Not the only reason, but that's a primary driver, so that we can make up for that time and keep the goals in front of us. So I look forward to this hearing. It's one of my favorite every year. I don't know why there aren't Klieg lights and cameras all over the room. But I do think this is a terribly important subject. And I thank, again, my colleagues for their support and their commitment. I yield back.
I'd like to thank the gentleman. And I'm going to hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. And we're now going to recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome a repeat visitor of this chamber, I think one of the few peoples none of us have yelled at in the federal government, Mr. David Powner, the Director of IT Management Issues, the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Ms. Beth Killeran, Deputy Assistant Secretary for IT, Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you for being here. Ms. Sheila Conley, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Acting Chief Financial Officer at HHS, and Dr. Rick Holgate, the Research Director at Gartner Incorporated and former CIO of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Please rise and raise your right hands, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. And let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate if you would please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. And I'd like to recognize Mr. Powner for his opening remarks for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hurd, Meadows, Ranking Members Kelly, Connolly, and members of the subcommittees, I'd like to thank you and your staff for your continued oversight on the implementation of Fitara with this 4th set of grades. This is the first time we've seen overall grades not improve, with only 4 grades higher, 5 lower, and 15 holding steady. I would attribute this in part to transitioning administrations and also to your expansion of the scoring methodology. For example, data centers now include how agencies report on 5 optimization metrics in addition to cost savings. This has resulted in data center grades going down because only EPA and SSA report good progress on these metrics. The transparent reporting on data center progress that Fitara requires needs to continue beyond the October 2018 date, since there are significant expected savings beyond 2018. Extending Fitara's sunset dates and realizing these out-year savings is especially important given the MGT Act and this committee's oversight on modernizing old, insecure legacy systems. Another change to the scorecard is on incremental development, where we now capture more software development projects. This change was suggested by several CIO shops, and I'd like to add that we have had good scorecard discussions with almost half of the CIOs or their staff. Although we've seen progress in the areas scored to date, incremental development, data center optimization, and investment transparency, we think there is great room for improvement on reducing duplicative business or administrative systems under the Portfolio Stat initiative. Your preview of agencies' efforts to better manage software licenses, a major area of Fitara not scored to date, is eye-opening. Your preliminary grades would be 2 A's, 1 C, and 21 F's. And if this area was incorporated into the overall grades, we would have 3 agencies going up and 12 down instead of the 4 up and 5 down currently. Only 3 agencies, Education, GSA, and USAID, have complete inventories of their software licenses. This is completely unacceptable, especially considering this committee's follow-up on Fitara with the passage of the complementary Megabyte Act. We need better management and more cost savings in this area. Again, this is another opportunity area to fill the working capital funds proposed in the MGT Act. Next, I'd like to turn, Mr. Chairman, to CIO authorities and on our ongoing work to this committee on CIO budget visibility, contract approval, and incremental development. The good news is we are hearing that Fitara is improving the relations between chief financial officers and chief acquisition officers. But these improved relations are going to take time to result in the outcomes we need. We are still finding CIOs with limited visibility into IT spending, IT contracts and acquisitions not being approved by CIOs, CIOs not certifying that all major acquisitions are taking an incremental approach, despite all these areas being required in Fitara. We plan to have these reports ready for your 5th scorecard, Mr. Chairman. The reason these authorities are needed is simple, because we need CIOs governing over all IT. We recently found another example of a failed IT acquisition with the Coast Guard's electronic health record that illustrates why CIO authorities need strengthened. Tens of millions of dollars were wasted, nothing was delivered, and when I recently met with the admiral in charge, I asked this simple question: was the CIO involved? The answer: Not then, but they are now with the new EHR acquisition. This is exactly why Fitara and strengthening CIO authorities are so critically important, to have better delivery of federal IT acquisitions and to more efficiently manage federal IT operations. Although there have been some encouraging efforts with the current administration that highlight the importance of delivering technologies more effectively, namely the Office of Innovation and the American Tech Council, agency CIOs and the federal CIO are key to carrying out these high-level agendas. In fact, history tells us that the best progress we've seen on managing federal IT is when the federal CIO takes an active and aggressive role. This was a major theme that also emerged from the Comptroller General's IT Forum that we recently held with current and federal CIOs. Currently, the federal CIO and 8 department CIO positions are vacant, and although we have seen several capable individuals filling in, this lack of permanent leadership will negatively impact the progress we are making on Fitara. Your scorecard, Mr. Chairman, highlighting these vacancies will hopefully help draw appropriate attention to these critical positions. Chairman Hurd, Meadows, Ranking Members Connolly and Kelly, thank you again for your continued leadership and oversight of federal IT.
Thank you, Mr. Powner. Now, I've been told that HHS has one statement. Is that correct? And who will be delivering it? Ms. Killeran, you're recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Chairman Hurd, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Members Kelly and Connolly, thank you for allowing the Department of Health and Human Services to come before you today. Since the passage of Fitara, HHS has been committed to making sure that we are cost-effective, provide high-quality IT that benefits the American citizens and the services by which we provide. This is a shared commitment both by the HHS CFO, our Chief Acquisition Officer, our Chief Human Capital Officer, our mission programs, and myself. Together, we understand that HHS's IT budget totals $14 billion, and that the spending across our entire portfolio consists of a number of major investments at our operating divisions and our staff divisions. The leadership team strives every day to make sure that we're strategically leveraging IT to fulfill our mission and to make sure that we're providing health and human services that foster advances in medicine, public health, and social services so needed by our nation. As a result of this effort, so far, our implementation plan, we have actually able to accomplish 34 of the 39 milestones set forward in our implementation plan, and actually 5 additional ones just within the last month. One of the Fitara successes we've had is the establishment of a process and criteria for delegating authority to the operating division CIOs. As a large federated organization, we have to be able to identify, prioritize, validate, and verify our non-major IT acquisitions. I'm happy to say that through the criteria that we've established, we've delegated 10 different delegations to those operating division CIOs, and on a yearly basis, I am personally responsible for providing input into the performance of those CIOs. And we evaluate that delegation on a yearly basis. We also have been able to increase our use of agile development. We seek to deliver IT-enabled functionality every 6 months. And this has been able to be accomplished through a process of improving our governance and integration, solving collaboration efforts through development teams, and by making sure that we integrate at all aspects with our customers. Over the last 2 years, the CFO and I have jointly held IT budget reviews to review, approve, or reject the IT budgets across our organization. The purpose of these budgets is to review and discuss how each of our operating divisions is looking at their IT budget and how they're prioritizing, addressing risk within their programs, aligning those IT dollars to agency priorities, and making sure that we understand not just the operating division priorities, but the enterprise ones as well. 2 key accomplishments in this area to date is being able to increase the ability to add funding for our cybersecurity initiatives, which we have been able to, over the last 3 years, increase and has dramatic success, changing our budget from 1% overall to 5% in cybersecurity since 2015. We also have been making sure that we are looking at our legacy systems and making sure each of our organizations are prioritizing those legacy systems and how they are making initiatives and decisions to make the necessary changes to those systems to keep them secure and viable for those missions. Also in the stewardship, we're making sure that we are looking at planning, proactively managing our risk across our organization, and to continue to mature our risk management process and evaluation techniques as we update our IT dashboard. We conduct portfolio reviews at individual programs, and this year we actually did one at an operating division looking at the totality of their IT programs, which we will adopt and continue to improve and implement across the organization. For data center consolidation, we continue to make sure that we are looking at the outcome metrics, but we have a challenge around the continuing change in definition and the changing of the goals and requirements. We make sure that we are also adopting cloud technology as part of our strategy, and I will say that we have had success in this area, increasing our funding in cloud from $135 million in 2015 to $600 million last year, and we think we'll have $750 million in cloud this year alone. In addition, we have to make sure we're looking at our workforce. And so I have partnered with our Chief Human Capital Officer to make sure that we're looking at our requirements to make sure we have the ability to attract, develop, and retain IT talent. Currently, we have 1,400 positions in our organization, 3,000 of them overall, but we actually have an over 30% vacancy rate, which makes it critical for us to understand how to do this job better, to have those resources. Finally, as HHS continues to move forward with implementation of Fitara, the department has built a collaborative, integrated business foundation that promotes comprehensive governance across the department where we can optimize our mission, make sure we provide secure IT services that meet the advances needed for effective and meaningful outcomes for citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Holgate, you're up. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd and Meadows, ranking members Kelly and Connolly, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting Gartner to discuss the Fitara scorecard. As the former CIO of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, I'm keenly aware of the challenges faced by federal agencies in managing information technology. Both through my involvement with ACT-IAC and most recently as a research director at Gartner, an IT research and advisory firm assisting 98% of the Fortune 100, serving over 10,000 global institutions, and drawing on the experience of over 60,000 IT leaders in making smarter IT decisions, I've gained broader perspectives on more effective ways of using IT to further agency missions. Effective use of IT delivers strategic value and is viewed as a competitive differentiator. Successful organizations integrate their personnel and processes, including IT, to ensure the success of all of their initiatives, and they treat cybersecurity as part of an executive-level risk management program. With ever-accelerating changes and innovation in the commercial technology market, not to mention new and evolving cybersecurity threats, federal agencies must get faster and better at acquiring, integrating, and maximizing the value of best-in-class technologies. Fitara is certainly a step in the right direction, but CIOs can only do so much on their own. First, the federal government must treat IT more strategically and engage agency leadership. Innovative and successful companies involve CIOs early and often on the front end of strategic planning to ensure that they are able to acquire the technology that enables their organizations to succeed. CIOs must be given the opportunity to shape and influence how IT enables the agency strategy early on. Second, improve acquisition, budget, and funding practices. Acquisition, budgeting, and funding can be impediments if they are too focused on inflexible compliance and risk aversion, as opposed to delivering business and mission outcomes. Adequate resourcing is also a concern. Transformational investments make up only around 21% of the federal IT budget, while private sector firms spend about 30%. The average legacy system in the federal government is 14 years old, compared with 10 years in the private sector. Accelerating adoption of new technology is essential. Modernizing acquisition practices is equally important. Federal agencies must stop thinking of their IT as simply a cost center and reimagine it as an engine for innovation and transformation, and have the discipline to avoid instinctive cuts during periods of austerity. Agencies must also be better at using available funds. CIOs, program managers, acquisition personnel, and budget offices must work together in a better and more unified fashion to avoid delays and bad outcomes. Government-specific reforms, such as increased access to multi-year funding, shared accountability models under Fitara, and meaningful maturity model reports to OMB and Congress could also improve government outcomes. Third, achieve greater visibility into agency activities. CIOs need better visibility into the business and contracting operations of the agency. The committee should consider clarifying Fitara's scope. Using an objective, proven rationalization methodology at both the infrastructure and application levels can reduce system duplication, achieve economies and savings, and improve commonality and interoperability. Adding commodity IT measures to the Fitara scorecard and empowering CIOs to undertake these activities and work further with shadow or business unit IT could substantially optimize IT costs and manage security risks while enhancing productivity. Fourth and finally, improve organizational competence. There are many men and women working for the federal government who are doing their best to manage a variety of IT systems from multiple generations to achieve agency goals. Still, we must improve overall competence. Successful businesses rapidly discard outdated technologies while hiring and empowering smart IT managers. In the federal government, we often see legacy technologies operating far beyond their end of life, while talented IT managers rotate too quickly to make any appreciable impacts. Capitalizing on expanded and improved human capital flexibilities can provide greater access to talent and better cross-disciplinary development opportunities. In addition, CIOs in the IT workforce require a high-functioning team of finance, acquisition, HR, security, and legal professionals for effective IT leadership. The absence of committed and skilled resources across all of these disciplines places an organization and its IT initiatives at elevated risk. Congress has a role to play here, too, in ensuring that agency planning, acquisitions, and funding are all unified. Initiatives such as the Megabyte Act, PMIAA, and the pending MGT Act all have productive solutions to offer, and I urge you to consider how each of these bills, as well as Fitara, integrate to make agencies smarter, more agile, and more cost-effective. Fitara is a positive first step, and I encourage its extension and expansion. I suggest 3 particular additional steps: encouraging agency heads to articulate a clear strategy for leveraging IT to improve business and mission outcomes, including optimizing enterprise, not just IT costs, adjusting scoring metrics and methods to incentivize desired behaviors, and creating an integrated and streamlined approach for assessing progress and across the diverse reporting demands placed on agencies. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Holgate. I'd like to now recognize the chairman, Chairman Meadows, for his first round of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank each of you for your insightful testimony. Ms. Kelleran or Ms. Conley, let me come to you. Out of the, I guess it was $14 billion that you spend in IT, how much of that actually is grants to states?
$7.2 billion.
All right, so out of the $7.2 billion to states, which states are doing the best job of implementing that money?
So that we would have to get back with you through our grants program, because that is automatically done through our grants and is not actually part of what the CIO and CFO look at it.
So you have no idea which state's doing, do you not see a problem with that?
With the way that the Fitara works, and we actually asked for clarification when the bill came out, is whether agencies should be responsible for the grants funding or not. And the guidance we got from OMB is that grants would be excluded from the oversight.
I agree with that. So that you're not having to focus on the $7.2 billion according to Fitara, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, so let me ask you the follow-up question, because I thought that's where we were going. If you're only having to look at the remaining balance, why are we at D's across the board? Why are we not making better progress? Because, you know, I can understand if it's a big number. Why are we not making better progress?
So within the large federated agency, so this is my 3rd federal agency. So I started at Treasury and then spent 9 years and 11 years at DHS and now here. When you're in a large federated agency, it takes us a little bit of time to establish those foundations.
So when assuming that it takes a little bit of time, when are we going to see an improved score?
So you'll actually see when we talk a little bit, we actually have some cost savings that we have. We actually have a plan for the data centers.
So when are we going to see an improved score?
We're expecting to see some scores change within the next 12 to 18 months.
All right. So, Mr. Powner, let me come to you. Is their plan aggressive enough based on other agencies? Should we be expecting more?
Yeah, I think you should. So clearly they have a Fitara implementation plan they've made progress on, as Ms. Kelleran has said. I think when you have the large federal agencies, federated agencies, there's a real opportunity to go after that commodity IT, because a lot of those components, there's an opportunity to look at duplication across those components. The other thing is when you look at the data for HHS on data centers. They've actually closed a lot of data centers and done a decent job on that, but there's not much in related savings. So we need to look real hard at the related savings and also at their optimization.
So, Ms.
metrics
Conley,
there.
what happened to the money?
Thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for your question. In terms of what's happened to the money, at HHS, Beth mentioned we're a large federated organization.
Yeah, I've only got 5 minutes.
Okay.
Just what happened to the money?
In many cases with these data center consolidations, we have gaps in IT spending, meaning there are things that we need to do within our IT portfolio. And oftentimes, the savings that are realized through these different consolidation efforts and modernization efforts are plowed back into those respective systems and infrastructure to provide things that we know need to be done to provide secure, reliable.
So without oversight of Congress, you're just reprogramming the dollars?
So many of those dollars are replowed into the very same systems and
So
infrastructure.
let me understand. You close down a data center and you plow it back into the same data center?
Well, if I might give you an example, with our financial systems modernization effort that we just upgraded our financial management systems in 2016, we moved to the cloud implementation. As part of doing that, we saved some money, but and maintained our operations and maintenance costs at the same level, yet we were able to provide things like disaster recovery.
All right,
and
so
more
other
secure,
things.
better
So here,
value to the
so Ms.
government.
Conley,
Sir.
Ms. Killoran, let me be specific. We're looking very closely at these numbers, and it's going to have implications from an appropriation standpoint. So let me come back to you, Mr. Powner. How much does DOD spend on IT annually?
So it's about close to 45% of the spend, which is $95 billion, so it's well into the $40 billion range.
So about 40 billion, and I noticed they got an F on the transparency and IT dashboard. I mean, why is that?
So what happened recently is there were about 15 billion that was on the dashboard that just went away. And what we understand is that it's been classified, we believe, under the national security system umbrella. And it's okay because there is an exemption for national security systems, but to have 15 billion magically appear under that umbrella doesn't seem right. And
Well, it doesn't seem right to me either. And so here's what I would ask for you to do, and I'll close with the chairman's indulgence. We're being asked to fund DOD above the $603 billion that the president has requested. In fact, some in our conference wants it to be $640 billion. Take the message back to them. Unless they get their heart right on this, there will be no support for increasing that. And I don't know how to make it any clearer. I'll let my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about perhaps HHS and some of the others. But with DOD, it's going to require Republican votes to increase it. And I, for one, unless they get their heart right on the transparency, am not going to be very supportive. If you will take that to them, if you would.
Will do.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Ms. Kelly, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. In my opening statement, I talked about the hiring freeze that was ordered, and in April, the Office of Management and Budget issued a memorandum to all agencies requiring them to reduce their civilian workforces. The OMB memorandum fulfills a key objective of the president, and I quote, "a long-term plan to reduce the size of the federal government's workforce through attrition." Mr. Powner, is retention a critical factor in maintaining an effective IT workforce, and how so, if so?
Yeah, clearly you need to retain the good employees we have, but also, too, we have significant gaps when you look at the IT workforce, not only from a cyber perspective, but also with some of the other key disciplines, systems engineers and architects and the like. So that's always been a big challenge in the federal government.
I know we've talked about that before, and do we attribute it to just the lack of a pool to pick from, and also the salaries we might not pay?
Yeah, that's true, and I think that's why it's critical that when you look at your IT workforce as a whole and some of the challenges with the salary challenges the federal government faces, you need to supplement that appropriately and be really strategic about how you do that with contractors, because it can be done with contractors, and that right mix is what you really want to obtain.
Okay, Thank you. Dr. Holgate, in your assessment, can agencies make the necessary improvements under Fitara if they don't have the flexibility to hire new employees or replace vacancies?
Well, certainly it's highly dependent on the approach that agencies take in responding to OMB M1722. There's latitude given in that memorandum and actually an encouragement for agencies to explore technology-enabled operational efficiencies and effectiveness. So if agencies are adequately creative about their response to that memo, they should have the flexibility to be more creative and use IT more effectively in their response. The danger, frankly, is if they take a more reactionary, tactical approach and treat it more as a cost-cutting exercise, in which case it can result in relatively haphazard, across-the-board reductions without that strategic foresight, without that projection for longer-term opportunities that they may be foregoing. So that's the danger in the memorandum itself, is just the nature of the response by the agencies themselves. We haven't seen those responses yet in terms of how agencies are thinking about those challenges. But that's the key issue there, is how are agencies going to actually shape their response?
Off the top of your head, can you give an example of what being creative means, what that could mean or could look like?
Yeah, so for example, leveraging the IT talent that they already have and possibly supplementing it with additional talent in the near term to enable them to automate traditional tasks or mission space, to be more creative across agency boundaries, to reimagine the way agencies deliver services. There are opportunities like that that require a certain amount of creativity and are critically dependent on IT to enable those types of opportunities. So if agencies treat this more as a cost-cutting exercise in an across-the-board fashion, they may sacrifice those long-term opportunities just by virtue of reducing costs in the short term. Frankly, Gartner's written a lot of research on cost optimization at the enterprise level and the opportunities that IT can present with those opportunities. We've also written a fair amount about the risks of cost cutting, in particular by taking a blanket approach and foregoing the future opportunities.
Thank you. Ms. Killeran, in your written testimony, you state, recently HHS conducted an IT workforce inventory, and we found that workforce shortages and ever-increasing workload often create an imbalance that hinders employees' ability to attend training or obtain certification. This seems like a serious problem because, as your written testimony states, many of HHS's 3,000 IT workers, and I quote, do not have the diverse expertise necessary to support current federal IT needs, including IT project and program management, architect, or cybersecurity. Did I hear you correctly?
That is correct.
What are some of the gaps in skills and staffing that you attribute to the shortage in IT expertise at your agency that you mentioned in your written testimony?
So we have, as Mr. Powner indicated, we have significant decreases of our needs in cybersecurity, enterprise architecture, systems engineering are the predominant areas where we have the most significant shortfalls, and then obviously programmatics as well. We actually have worked with our Chief Human Capital Officer to start building true capability and roadmaps on competencies that needed to be done for each of these areas, all the way from a GS5 up to what an SES would be. We have identified over 25 different critical positions at this point and have roadmaps for 11 of them. OMB and OPM have determined that this is a great model. We are actually helping to do the Federal CIO Workforce Committee at this, and OPM is trying to adopt that model federal-wide at this time.
I see my time's up, so I'll yield back for now.
I'd like to thank the gentle lady. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California. Mr. Issa, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to follow up, maybe just quickly. My question is one of timing. And I'm hearing people say we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough time. You know, I came to Congress in 2000, or was elected in 2000, sworn in January 3rd of 2001. Basically, I was elected when Amazon was founded. In 2006, well, I'll give you 2009, Uber was founded. Instagram in 2012. Snapchat in 2014. In 2014, we took an $82 billion spending and said we were going to deliver to the CIOs real authority to do a job that had previously not had budget authority, often, and at least in the case of the Affordable Care Act, had 3 non-professionals each pointing at the other saying they didn't have the ability to stop a bad project. We did that after we had written off in Dayton $1 billion at the Air Force, the Department of Defense, on a project where they simply got to the end of $1 billion in spending and said it won't procure parts accurately. So I think this first question would be for the GAO. Mr. Powner, tell me, why is it I should accept that companies today will launch on Amazon and be world-class, global, with apps that allow for tremendous ability to take labor out and put efficiency into things as complex as 1 million cars around the world being there when you want one? Why is it I have to accept that it takes 4 years and the progress is minuscule?
Well, we shouldn't accept it. I mean, we spend now for the FY18 budget that's north of $95 billion on IT, and we all know that a lot of that goes towards the old O&M, but 20% of
We know the cost of a Nook has
Yeah.
gone down if you're buying a desktop.
But 20% of $95 billion is a lot of money. And here's the interesting thing: is we do see pockets where we do it right. So we don't want to hear that we can't do it right. I mean, we see pockets within DoD, within the intelligence community. The weather satellite that we just launched that provides great weather warnings. I mean, yeah, it took a little longer and maybe a little more money, but there are these pockets of success. So we need to continue to replicate that. Hold CIOs in these agencies, actually agency heads accountable. I think some of the CIOs need some help from the agency heads to write these CIO authorities. And going back to the DoD story, I think DoD is the last organization in the world that should be exempt from Fitara. If any organization needs a private sector type CIO, it's DoD.
Oh, trust me, we negotiated to try to get less exemptions, and they have their own little world. They said they'd already, quite frankly, they said they'd already fixed it with their earlier bill. And yes, we need to have less exemptions. But Ms. Killeron, let me ask you a question. Having been with 3 agencies and now as a CIO of this one, we gave you budget authority. We gave you the ability to work with your peers to look for, if you will, interagency opportunities. Have you taken advantage of any interagency opportunities where you looked at your other CIOs and said, let's do this together? Let's go up on an Amazon cloud and have one common software platform that we can share for certain types of uses, whether it's HR or other areas?
So at this time, not across the federal agencies.
But why not? Do you lack authority?
No, it's not a lack of authority. It's understanding what we have within our department first and understanding what we have and where those opportunities might be across the federal government. So what we have done internally is trying to get our own house in order and understanding what we have first, and then that allows us to be able to start interacting better with the other federal.
So following up on that, cataloging all the software and characterizing it is an element for CIOs to evaluate each other, right?
Yes, sir.
And the potential cost savings if one agency is up on a cloud with a next-generation software that does something and the others are using a DEC Alpha or something, that means that you can get immediate savings if you only knew, right?
I think that's a yes, but, because sometimes there are capabilities, but then they have to be modified and altered based on security requirements and interfaces that different agencies need, but at least would it be nice to understand what's available.
Well, once the student loan program gets fixed with its interface with the IRS, hopefully it'll be world-class. So I agree with you that sometimes there are security problems. Let me just close with one question. When I hear that $7.5 billion in grants and similar money at many other agencies were determined by the Office of Management Budget not to be for the CIO to oversee in any way, shape, or form, and thus, basically avert the intention of Fitara, which was to give budget authority and financial control. Just an opinion, but I'd like to hear your opinion. Should we speak to OMB and see if, in fact, they would rethink that?
I think understanding, again, that realm of possibility, and so just as you
Because
mentioned.
the Act doesn't say it, that's an interpretation.
That's correct. But I mean, to your point of realm of possibility, there are a number of capabilities and services that the grantees are given that might also help not only our federal agencies, but others that are doing similar like services. So being able to have some, especially when you're interfacing and having some commonality of services, if each of them is doing them in silos, it makes it very difficult to share those capabilities in the future.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, that's not an original thought. Many of us remember when the Affordable Care Act gave many, many billions of dollars to various states who essentially stood up the exact same platform, but each one inventing it, some succeeding and some failing. This was part of the genesis for Mr. Connolly and I working on this. So thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
The gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia is now recognized.
I thank the chair. And just to follow up on Mr. Ice's point, obviously, if 100% of that $7.2 billion in grants were designed to support 50-year-old legacy systems, and that's all it did, we would be very bothered by that. And we wouldn't want you to persist in that investment. We'd want you to pressure those grantees to upgrade their IT. So at some point, we are concerned about that, and you need to be too. So I echo what Mr. Issa had to say. Mr. Powner, and by the way, Dr. Holgate, thank you. Your testimony was terrific. I mean, I think you laid out a very powerful strategigic framework for why this bill was passed and what we intend for it to achieve. And I just want to thank you. I think it was one of the best articulations of what we're about from a witness in a long time, so thank you. Mr. Powner, and thank you for all of the work you and GAO have done. You've done a marvelous job in making this not only a high-risk item, but at the very top of the agenda. It's not sexy, but Lord, can it lead to savings, and more importantly, make us so much more efficient in delivering services to the people we serve. That's really what this is about. Why is data center consolidation so important? From your point of view, why is it such a high priority in the Issa Connolly bill?
Well, we have very inefficient data centers that are out there. Remember, we got into this in 2010 because the average server in the federal government was utilized about 10%. That metric now, the target is 60% of our servers. So we have underutilized equipment, underutilized facilities, and frankly, some of them are so old we could do a lot to improve our security posture too by upgrading these centers. And I do think, back to your sunset comment earlier, I mean, there's at least $1.5 billion that we're aware of that is on the table beyond 2018, and I think if you really press DOD and some of the other large organizations, there's probably a lot more.
In your 2016 report on this subject, you said that the consolidation plans could save taxpayers more than $8 billion by 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How much has been saved to date?
So it's been about $3 billion of the 8 has been saved to date. So pretty good progress.
Real money.
Real money.
Bigger than the entire grant program of HHS. $8 billion, I mean.
That's right.
In terms. So why? I mean, my colleague, Mr. Meadows, made the point that we got to get our arms around the savings. If you're effectuating savings, but we're not accounting for it, you know, the risk is people call it zero. So, Mr. Powner, could you comment on Ms. Calloran's explanation for why we have underreported or underachieved in terms of data center savings at HHS, even though they're in fact doing their job, they're consolidating?
Yeah, there's been consolidations. The dollars are minimal when you look at the millions of dollars that have been reported there. It sounds like there's probably more that's not reported that are getting reinvested. I think the important thing here is the transparency, and back to the MGT Act. If you want to create these working capital funds at departments and agencies for reinvestment, let's make darn sure that the reinvestment is on the priorities. And if you don't have transparency, there's no assurance that it's on the priorities.
I would hope, Ms. Killeran, and it sounds like you would, you might sort of follow in the footsteps of USAID and reach out to GAO so we have a better mechanism for capturing the actual good work you're doing and the savings they're effectuating, but also that we, in fact, where we are reinvesting, we're reinvesting in the priorities that Mr. Powner just talked about. Are you willing to do that?
So thank you for the question, sir. We actually talked before the hearing to do just that.
Okay, great. My final question, because I'm going to run out of time. Mr. Powner, why is DOD so obstinate? Why are they so resistant? And you heard Mr. Meadows say, from a Republican point of view, take back a message. I don't speak for all Democrats, but I think most of us on our side of the aisle would echo his sentiments. Enormous frustration that that's the biggest single appropriation of the federal government, and it's getting bigger, and they seem to inoculate themselves from all norms of accountability. And it's very frustrating. For example, OMB directed agencies to submit plans for detailing data center consolidations. Is that correct?
Correct?
And what is the Department of Defense's plan?
No, they didn't get it in on time. It recently did come in, but they were very, very late. By the time we wrote that report, it was not in.
So were there other agencies also failing to submit?
Nope, they were the only remaining.
They were
one.
the only agency. And aren't they also the only agency yet to achieve what's called an unqualified audit of their books?
That's correct. The Comptroller General's testified.
And
on that
don't they
multiple
exempt
times.
themselves from what other civilian agencies subscribe to in terms of a GSA list of sort of off-the-shelf generic products that can be purchased at a lower cost?
Yes, there's some of that.
Isn't this special? And didn't we have a hearing a few weeks ago in this committee about $125 billion, billion with a B, wasted by the Department of Defense that GAO uncovered?
Yes, yes.
125 billion. Like, so my final question, I'm sorry, but why the resistance?
I think when you look at the DOD IT accountability and organization structures, it's spread over too many organizations. You have the CIO shop, you got the management organization, you have the acquisition shop, and it's spread over those different organizations, and I think other than the CIO shop, IT doesn't get the right importance and visibility. When you look at the data center consolidation, at one time DOD alone was about $4.8 billion in savings. They backed off of that significantly. I think you really need to look at their IT spend. Look at embedded IT at DOD, weapon systems, satellite systems. I think a CIO type would really benefit some of those large acquisitions at DOD and help with the cost overruns and the lack of delivery. We've had some discussions recently with folks on the Senate side on, in terms of their authorization committee, and that we just laid it on the table that when you look at embedded IT and other things at DOD, it would benefit from a private sector like CIO type.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The distinguished gentleman from the great state of Michigan is now recognized for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start, Ms. Keller. As much entertainment as it would be to have the Department of Defense be here, and truly I think everyone would be thrilled to have a discussion with them about their score, I'd like to chat with you a little bit about your testimony. You indicate that 34 of the 39 goals that you had set up for your implementation plan had been achieved or were on target. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Then how is it that you still have a D-minus score?
So the goals that we have go to the different elements that were in the Fitara guidance provided by OMB, making sure that we are putting forward the things such as establishing delegations of authority,
Okay.
reviewing our IT budgets.
Mr. Powner, can you give me any guidance as to what you think that score will be shortly? Because a D-minus is not exactly stellar.
Well, clearly, when you look incremental development, they had a high score, so the HHS doing a good job there. The savings, the two areas we score on savings, very low scores because of the reported savings on commodity IT and data centers. And the other thing, when you look at their dashboard, they're quite green. Only about 14% of their investment dollars is red or yellow. That's really, that's not a lot of risk when you look at their investments, and they got a lot of risky investments there. That's why they get a low score there.
So what do we expect? I appreciate that you didn't give me much indication what we expect their score to be in a year from now. I think we need to have an idea where we expect these agencies, what they expect of themselves to be 12 months from now.
Well, I would hope if we get the reported savings that within 6 months to a year, we see an improvement in the score.
I spent 35 years in private business. Only in government do we say things like, we hope to see improvement, which, with all due respect, doesn't answer the question I asked, which is, what do we think, what do we believe the score will be? I'm talking about the HHS, they're here. What do we believe it's going to be? Ms. Keller, do you have an answer for me on what your target is for that score in a year from now?
So as I indicated, we are working to make sure that we are updating and working with GAO on our numbers. So for example, one problem we have is around the savings. One is around the fact that, as Ms. Connolly indicated, reinvesting those, so working with GAO how to capture the savings as we are reinvesting to show that at least we did save them in these particular areas. We are getting ready to post an $85 million savings in data centers onto the dashboard today. We are also working to make sure that we are modifying our investment capability to improve our acquisitions.
Well, let me express this. I appreciate that, and it's obviously not just HHS. If this sheet came up in our monthly management meeting or my quarterly meeting with my board of directors, we wouldn't have been in business anymore. That much red and yellow. We used the same scorecard, red, yellow, green. And obviously, paying attention to what's red and what's yellow was critically important. And we had goals in terms of when we're going to move those. And the problem I have across the board is we don't have dates. We don't have, we're going to be green on this within the next year or yellow on this. We hope to see improvement. And that's, in my opinion, to get improvement is wholly inadequate. Dr. Holgate, let me ask you a question real quickly because I run out of time as well. You talked about cultural change needs that are needed in these agencies in order to see meaningful gains. One of the things I note in the score sheet is in many cases the agencies have particularly bad scores, poor scores, let's put it that way. The CIO does not report to the secretary or the deputy secretary. Now, let me explain to you, in my company, the chief technology officer reported to me. And believe it or not, I knew where to find him 24/7 because we couldn't get hacked with student data records. We could not have that happen. Give me some examples of how you think what we need to do to get the culture to change in some of these agencies so, in fact, it gets the attention it warrants.
Well, so one aspect I alluded to in my testimony about inviting agency heads to come in to explain to the committee what their attitude is toward IT on behalf of their CIO as an important enabler of business and mission outcomes that IT represents. And the question is, do agency heads fully embrace that as an opportunity that they need to capitalize on, or do they treat IT as an afterthought, an expense that must be minimized? And that's the cultural change I'm referring to, because frankly, most federal agencies treat IT not as a strategic asset, they treat it as a headache that they need to minimize.
Well, and because of that, corollary to that is because they treat it as an issue like that, we also get inadequate cybersecurity. The two go hand in hand. The cost of acquisitions and how we efficiently acquire technology is one thing, but if you're treating it basically as a nuisance, guess what? We have security risks on our IT, and we've seen them across the federal government.
Absolutely, and contrary to the private sector that treats cybersecurity as an enterprise risk issue, as I alluded to, that's a distinct cultural difference that the federal government hasn't adjusted to yet. We've seen repeated encouragement that the federal government has gotten to treat cybersecurity as an enterprise risk issue. We've seen some recent evidence of that in the cybersecurity executive order that was just recently issued, but we haven't seen that fully adopted yet at the federal level.
Well, I thank you. My time is expiring, and Mr. Chair, I'd like to have a conversation. We have some time about how it is we mandate some structural change in these departments so that the CIO gets the attention it warrants. Thank you.
I'm going to recognize myself for a little bit of time. I'd like to start off by thanking the minority staff for the suggestion of Dr. Holgate to this panel, because I think it's been very valuable. And Dr. Holgate, am I paraphrasing you correctly when I say that agencies can make their IT systems or IT centers not a cost center, but something that drives business and mission outcomes?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that in order to achieve that the agency head needs to recognize the importance of cybersecurity, of how their IT networks drive business and mission outcomes?
Absolutely.
And would that also mean that having the CIO report directly to the agency head, isn't that an important step?
It's certainly relevant. It's not necessarily necessary based on the relationship that the agency head has with the CIO, but it would certainly be an indicator that the agency head has taken that much more seriously.
An indicator, great. Ms. Connolly, you are the Deputy Assistant Secretary, and you are the acting CFO.
I'm no longer the acting CFO. We have another individual that's come in as part of the new administration that is the acting CFO. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Finance as well as the Deputy CFO.
So that's the position you're going to be in for some time.
I believe so.
And you had previous experience in the private sector in helping provide financial management strategies to private sector companies, public sector?
That's correct.
And how long have you been at HHS?
11 years at HHS now.
So Ms. Killeran does not report directly to the deputy or the agency head. I think that's a problem. Would you agree or disagree with that?
It depends, I think I would say. How do you like
Well-
that pause? But I would say, so if I may.
So let me rephrase the question.
Yes.
Why wouldn't Ms. Killeran report directly to you or the agency head?
So we actually, Beth and I are actually peers. We're both deputy assistant secretaries. She's in charge of information technology. I'm in charge of finance. And we have a suite of what we will call our CXO suite. So it covers finance, covers.
So who's your boss?
My boss is the assistant secretary for financial resources, who then reports.
And who's her boss?
The assistant secretary for administration.
And who's the boss of the assistant secretary for administration?
Both of those assistant secretaries report to the deputy secretary and
And then the deputy secretary's boss is?
the secretary.
If my count's right, that's like 3 people, right? In between the IT center and the C-suite or the head of the organization. Would you have ever advised a private sector company to organize their organization that way?
Well, it would depend upon the span of control. So if you have an organization that's headed up and the deputy, you look at the span
Mr.
of.
Powner, does that make sense?
I think if we want to have, as Dr. Holgate said, CIOs as strategic partners, you got to report to the box at the top. And I think a key question is for these agencies at the head is, what are the 3 things we're doing to transform our departments or agencies? Technology will be involved in that. And what's the role of the CIO in helping us get there? And I don't think you get the right answers to those questions, Chairman Hurd.
Ms. Killeran, $14.2 billion, that's the IT spend?
Thereabouts, sir, yes.
$7.2 billion is these grants, which
Yes,
you
sir.
don't have to oversee, so that's $7 billion. How much control do you have of that $7 billion?
Of the grants, none.
No, the 7 million.
Of the
billion.
internal?
Yeah.
So through the delegation, I have authority over all of it.
So you can stop any program
Yes, sir.
from happening, and you could buy anything that you need to put on your system.
They would have to go through the organizations because the appropriations go directly to our operating divisions.
So why do you not know what all software you have on your system?
So for example, just in prepping for this hearing over the last year, just in Microsoft alone, we had over 170 contracts that bought Microsoft products. And as you go through them, you have to go to individual resellers. To fix that problem, we're using the cybersecurity, continuing diagnostics, and mitigation capabilities so that we can inventory ourselves and
So
try to have.
are you telling me that there's not software out there that would go out and figure all this out and spit back a
Yes, sir, and that's what I'm saying. That's what we're actually putting in place.
Okay,
and we'll
how
be in
long does
some-
that take?
So we're putting that in place before the end of the year. So we've done the hardware capability, and by the end of this fiscal year, we're putting the
And
software.
what's taking 6 months to do that, to implement it?
So the reasons is that there have been challenges with working with DHS and getting the license we need and the capabilities, because we far underscaled what we thought we would need, and so making that gap so that we have the totality of the license we need to deploy.
Ms. Connolly, does it make good financial sense to not know how many software licenses a organization has?
No, sir, it doesn't. And that is something that we recognize the need to get control over so that we can make this a far more efficient process. It's very important. All the software we run in the department is running off of software with licenses. That is a real opportunity for us to begin to consolidate and have greater sight across the organization to make better use of our licenses.
Ms. Killeran, how many times have you met with the good director of HHS?
The secretary, sir?
Secretary, excuse me.
Since his appointment, 3 times.
And how long, you've been in the position since 2014?
I started in this position, I started in December of 2015 and actually became the permanent CIO last July.
And how many times have you met with the number 2?
Currently, obviously, our number 2 is vacant. The
The
previous,
acting number 2?
I have not met with the acting number 2. Previous, though, the previous acting deputy secretary, we met almost biweekly, and I did also go to the secretary's quarterly meetings with all of the operating division heads.
Have either one of y'all suggested to the new leadership team of HHS a reorganization of HHS to ensure that the CIO reports closer than 3 layers down from the Secretary of HHS?
Well, as you may know, agencies are going through in implementing this new executive order and giving thoughts to ways in which we can reorganize our organizations to make
Have
them
y'all
more
come
effective.
to a conclusion of where the CIO
There
should
has,
sit?
it's still pre-decisional in terms of the results of those
Decision,
discussions.
I love that word.
Well-
So are you providing guidance, insight, perspective on where that should be?
So the way that the department is looking at it is they actually looked at the totality of the work and how we do that better. I was personally involved in some of those working groups and made recommendations through that process.
And what were the recommendations?
So they were around how to change the culture
Let me
and how to
rephrase the
change.
question. I'm trying hard not to be, like, your recommendation should be the CIO reports to the agency head or the true number 2. All right, this is pretty standard practice in industry. It should be standard practice across the government. And if agency heads are supposed to be responsible for the ultimate protection of the digital infrastructure, the person that has the authorities to do that should be directly under them. So that this isn't complicated, so let's stop making it complicated. And since we are in a period of this new implementation with the perspective that the White House has on this, which is right, suggest that you report directly to the person that is ultimate where the buck stops. This isn't hard. This isn't hard. So forward it, and maybe we need to write a letter to them and say, hey, just everybody do this, because this is ridiculous. And the fact that it's going to take 6 months to figure out all the licensing that you have makes 0 sense. My last is, anybody else? Yes? Robin Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is not even really IT related, but Mr. Powner, I know you have something to do with all the agencies under the federal government, and I was just saying to my colleague, it just sounds like there is just a lack of management structure, period, nothing to do with IT. Are all the agencies like this, like trying to decide who reports to who or what the pecking order is?
Well, it differs. I mean, there's half of them report to the box, half don't, right? Some of them that report to the box still don't have authorities. Some that don't report to the box do. I mean, it is so mixed. But I think the key is if you have a major, Chairman Hurd, back to your point, if you have a major cybersecurity breach in an agency, who are you going to call up in front of Congress to answer why? It's going to probably be that DEP secretary, along with a few others. But I don't know why DEP secretary would not want to rely on a CIO to transform the agency and to secure an agency, because if something happens, they're going to be the ones up here answering. Look what happened at OPM. It was the director of OPM that was up here answering questions, and it didn't fare very well for them. So I think the focus on keep pushing with your grades. I'll tell you what, one of the things that happened with your grades, I know you released them last night. and there were some media articles. We had 4 agency CIO shops call GAO this morning, wanted to talk about the grades. That's good. That's a good thing. So I'd say keep pushing.
No, and I'm just asking because before I came here, I was the Chief Administrative Officer of Cook County. And I know, there were people that reported directly to me about what was going on. I had like 10 agencies under me, so it just sounds so confusing. I'm not blaming you. It just sounds so confusing, and you need some advice from Dr. Holgate or something. It just sounds very confusing. Thank you.
Mr. Conley.
I was just going to offer to cooperate with you, Mr. Chairman. I like your idea of maybe what we do is kind of inventory outstanding issues that can be handled administratively and write a fairly comprehensive letter to our former colleague, Mr. Mulvaney. He was a member of this committee. He's familiar with these issues. I think he would be receptive, and I'd be glad to work with you, and I know Ms. Kelly would too, I'm sure, on a bipartisan basis to get that done.
Yeah, because when the next, thank you, I recognize myself again. When the next cyber attack happens, right, and we've gone through all these conversations, guess what? We're dragging everybody up in front here. If we have to use subpoenas, we will. We've done it before. We'll do it again. And I want to make sure that you have all the authorities you can. That's why we're working hard to get MGT, because instead of putting some of that money back into some of, buying services you may not need, why not use that money that you realize in that savings on the highest priority issues within your organization? That's the point of all this. And Mr. Powner, why are the grades so bad when it comes to software licensing?
That's a tough one because we issued a report several years ago that we had 22 of the 24 agencies had complete inventories. We've only had one uptick with 3. Now, to be fair to the agencies like a NASA, there's a partial inventory that Renee Wynn their CIO, has used to achieve some savings. I think a key thing why we don't have complete inventories is the CIO authorities. I think there's pockets within these federated agencies that CIOs cannot, that they don't have good visibility into what's going on. And I think it's a direct reflection on the CIO authorities why we don't have comprehensive software license inventories.
Good question. Ms. Kellen, my last question. You have roughly 3,000 employees within the IT shop. Do we have job descriptions for all of them?
There are job descriptions, but they vary. That's one of the things that we're working with both internally within HHS and now at a federal level to try to have standard job descriptions for the same types of work. It has been a potential issue.
I didn't write my note down. You named it something.
Oh, so we actually have competency roadmaps for each of our workforce, and we've done 11 of these competency roadmaps for particular IT series from a GS5 all the way up to an SES, including what certifications and skills they should have at each stage.
And you're comfortable OPM can take what y'all are doing and export that to other agencies?
Yes, we're actually in the process of doing that as we speak.
Do you have an idea of when that process should be completed?
So the first step of that they are expecting to have done, I think it's the first quarter of 18. So they're taking those 13 and trying to requalify them. Yes. Okay,
that's really helpful on the next project we're trying to work on. So we got to know what our gaps are in our IT staff. So seeing no further business, without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned. Thank you all for being here.